I went to college in the 70s, so my story is perhaps a little bit older. It's still horribly creepy though. During my freshman year, I decided to drive to my school rather than take a flight. I had an old beater car, you see. I was positive it would be fine for making the trip though. It would take me a couple of days to drive there. I figured it would be a pleasant little road trip before I started one of the most intimidating moments of my life. Well, it's not until you're driving across country that you realize just how many empty cornfields there are out there. At times, you can just be driving through miles and miles of corn that seems like it will never end. Anyone who's driven through that knows how hypnotic it can get after a while, and it certainly doesn't make it easy driving at night. At one point, very far in the middle of nowhere at night, I suddenly drove by a couple of hitchhikers on the side of the road. I wondered to myself just how they'd gotten so far away from civilization. I didn't pick them up though. I was never comfortable with the idea of picking up strangers. I'd heard too many stories about the unfortunate people that do. Instead, I simply drove right past them. Both guys started yelling obscenities at me for not stopping. I didn't really worry about it though. It wasn't exactly the first time I'd been yelled at, and I'd rather just get yelled at than pick up the wrong people and die by the side of the road or something. I don't know how late it was, but I got really super tired. I still seemed to be in the middle of nowhere, so I decided I would simply pull over and try to get a little bit of shut-eye before continuing. It was a normal thing to do, really. I hadn't even passed by or seen a hotel in quite a long time. I don't know how long I had been asleep when suddenly something woke me up. It was a tiny pinging sound, almost as if a pebble had just hit my car. I looked around. The first thing I noticed was that there was another car just up ahead of me some ways. It seemed someone else had stopped for the night too. It was too far ahead of me to see if anyone was inside or not though. That's when I heard a cracking sound. There was a small crack on my passenger side window. Again, it was as if I'd just been struck by a rock. Of course, I was very surprised. I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone there. Then there was another crack. I looked out into the corn instead. As I concentrated my eyes, I could just barely make out the silhouettes of two people hiding within the corn. It was dark, but it looked like one had a sling or something. When they noticed that I'd seen them, they came out of the corn pretty quickly. They came rushing out at me. I could see it was the two men I had passed by earlier. I had passed them quite a ways back. There's no way they could have caught up with me by just walking. All I could figure was that maybe the person in the car in front of me had given them a ride or something. I wanted to get away right away, so I turned on the ignition. Right then, one of the guys attacked my passenger window and shattered it completely. They both shouted at me, "You remember us, asshole? We're gonna make you pay." Fortunately, the car was able to start, so I just took off while they were trying to break the shattered glass of my window away and climb inside. I drove as fast as I could to get out of there. I was terrified. I thought they would just catch up to me again somehow. Was that car theirs, perhaps? If someone else had picked them up, why didn't I see anyone else there or in the car with them? I kept on looking behind me, waiting to see that car returning in my view. Each time I did, I sped up instinctually. Eventually, I did this when there was a police officer hiding in the dark, and he pulled me over. I got a real fortunate break, though. As soon as he pulled me over, those two guys drove right past me, one of them throwing something at my car. The stupidity of this was overwhelming, but I guess they didn't think the cop would bother to go after them, with me already stopped. Fortunately, the cop decided they were the bigger threat. It turns out I was right not to pick those two guys up. Someone did stop for them after me. They robbed him and took his car. That's how they caught up with me. He wasn't killed or seriously injured, thankfully, but still, to have someone rob you and steal from you when you're just trying to be nice and help them is absolutely terrible. In the end, I did still get a ticket, but they went off to jail. When my mom worked at Walmart, she was being harassed by a specific employee. The guy was your typical Billy badass who offered my mom to whoop my brother and I and kick us out when he learned she was widowed. My brothers and I were struggling to find work at the time. This probably would have already been a bad gamble on his end, since my older brother and I worked in the woods frequently and did lots of heavy moving for people. He would often make comments that creeped her out. I told her to report his ass to the boss. One night, my mom let me borrow her truck for something. I dropped her off and told her I was going to pick her up later. We were gonna go to a range day with my friends and teach a friend of mine's fiance gun safety and how to shoot. I'm a licensed concealed carrier. Even though I am though, I very rarely carry other than when I'm going hunting or going out to the range. I pulled up to pick my mom up from work. I see the dude she was talking about. He was smoking and seemingly observing us, trying not to make it obvious. My mom handed me money and told me to go grab a few things. I threw my jacket on to cover up my holster and walked in. I noticed he immediately started following me around. He was glaring at me, snarling, as if he was about to pounce and fight me. Every section I went to, he would suddenly appear right behind me. I decided to move throughout a few others and see what he was going to do. While there, I talked to a young female associate, some bullshit boondoggle, just to see his reaction. I could see he was clenching something in his hands and staring angrily. The associate felt uncomfortable as she kept on looking at him behind me. I felt a bit bad for her, so I moved away. He followed me all the way until I cut to the checkout. I got my things and started to leave. As soon as I got back to the car, my mom unlocked the door. Meanwhile, I was burning up. My jacket of choice was quite heavy. I was just unzipping it when my mom looked incredibly worried. I heard footsteps sprinting up to me. I turned around to see the man charging at me. As soon as he saw my holster, though, he stopped in place. "Excuse me, can I help you?" Luckily, I'd forgot to unequip my holster from range day preparations. He zipped over to his rusty truck as quick as possible. He jumped in and waited there, staring at both of us. My mom was, of course, very scared. I could see him light up a cigarette and just sit there watching us. My mom told me to go to the passenger side. I sat down, pulled up my phone, and started to call the police. My mom began driving, and the man immediately cut us off and drove down the road. We could see his truck waiting on the side of the highway. As we drove by, my mom immediately floored it and had me pump gas for her when we arrived at the station. I left my gun in the car with her as she locked the doors. Unbeknownst to my mom, I called her night manager and told her about the aggressive, threatening employee. He was, quote-unquote, shocked. I made it clear that if I saw that employee again, or if he tried to follow me or harass me, I was going to sue that store. It was on management for allowing such dangerous behavior by their own employees, after all. This was seemingly his final straw. Walmart managers had let the sexual harassment slide, but if it was employee-on-customer harassment, now that was too much. I got back in the pickup and my mom drove until we got home. The next morning, I filed a follow-up complaint on this man to the staff. They told me he'd already been fired and banned from the property, and threatened with legal charges as well. My mom came back and seemed a lot happier. She informed me that he had indeed been fired as they'd said, and I was very grateful. Hello, I'm 27 and am married to my husband who's 31. We have 2 children whose fake names are Isaac, who's 8 from my first marriage, and Tiana with my now husband. She's 5 years old. This is sort of an ongoing story, so it doesn't really have a resolution, but I'm very distraught right now. I've been seeing this woman almost everywhere I go. I have no idea if this is happening by coincidence or if she's doing this on purpose or what, and I'm trying my best to calmly remember it all. The whole situation started somewhere around May 2022. Isaac and I were at the local park, just playing together and doing our own thing. My son went off to play with some other child at the monkey bars when I saw this random woman approach me. She had red hair, which I'm pretty sure was natural, and her face seemed to be incredibly tear-stained. I became concerned. I thought she had been crying. I proceeded to ask her what was wrong, if she was all right, if there was anything I could do to help her. Instead of answering, though, she turned and stared at my son. The more she looked at him, the more she began to sob. All of a sudden, she sprinted right at him and picked him up, screaming, "Michael!" She kept calling him that. It really freaked me out. I mean, he was this random person, running to my kid, picking him up, and calling him a different name. My son and the other child got scared as well. I approached them quickly. I screamed at her to get lost, but she just stood there as I grabbed my son back. She seemed to get pretty enraged, actually. She muttered something I couldn't hear as she stomped away out of sight. The other child's father and I talked for a bit. He seemed quite alarmed by what had happened as well. He told me, though, that maybe she was a grieving mother and my son just looked like the child she'd lost or something. Still, I was very disturbed. I took my son home soon after. Since then, I'd been afraid to take any of my children to public areas, despite my husband's reassurance. Eventually, things started to settle down a bit, but skip to June 2nd, 2022. I suddenly got a call from my school stating that a woman who was a new volunteer for lunch duty had kept mentioning that my son was her Mikey Bear and that she'd been searching for him for years. They told me another worker who had been volunteering with them had reported her for this strange behavior. Of course, I was scared as hell. I acted immediately by signing my kids out for the day. When I called the school the next day, I was informed she was no longer there. I became pretty freaked out. I had no idea what this woman was going to do now. Skip to last week, July 13th, 2022. It was Tiana's birthday. We decided to host it at a park in my in-laws' hometown, somewhere far away. Everything went well, although I was a bit paranoid. It was then somewhere around 9 p.m. when we'd just begun tidying up. As I took a glance at some oak trees in the distance, admiring the view, I could have sworn I had seen her hiding behind one of them. I screamed at the top of my lungs and started to chase after her, but she sprinted away and disappeared. Ever since then, I've not seen her, but I really feel like this is not the end of it. I'm seriously considering homeschooling my children because of all that's happened. This happened 15 years ago now, when I had just come home from college on winter break. Home this time was not the house I'd grown up in. My parents had recently moved closer to our small city. It just didn't feel the same. It was a different space. Maybe that's what triggered my worry. In my family, I'm always the one thinking of worst-case scenarios. I'm generally distrustful and mostly seem like an annoying worrywart sometimes. Call it what you will, but it's also a gift of fear, am I right? One cold night, my parents had gone to bed upstairs, and the dog had followed suit. I thought I'd watch a bit of TV in the living room myself for a bit before going to sleep. I settled in on the couch. The living room was in front of the house, and with the recent move, the shutters on the windows weren't there at the moment, only see-through curtains that weren't really drawn even. I noted this, but I was used to our rural setting, when the only ones who could see in anyway were the neighbors we'd known for like 20 years. I was watching TV for about a half hour, when suddenly the screen just kinda cut out. It went all snowy, with the static and stuff. This was back in the days when you only watched whatever your local cable channels brought you. I looked up from whatever I was doing, maybe texting with a flip phone or something. At first, I was simply thinking, well, that sucks, but something felt off to me. I tried the remote, but no other channels worked either. I was sitting there thinking what I should do instead, when my cat jumped onto the windowsill and started wailing. What the fuck? This may seem innocuous, but anyone who knew my cat knew this was very strange behavior. He was pacing back and forth, wailing and staring out the window. A feeling of dread washed through me, and I was frozen. That feeling of dread was so fiercely visceral. What the hell was going on? Something was out there. I tried to settle myself down in this unfamiliar dark house. I did feel a bit better because what were the chances someone was out there? But then, there it was. I swear on all I have, this cold waft of air blew through, and I heard the side door open. I didn't even realize that door was there at the time. I became frozen. I sprinted upstairs to wake my parents and slumbering dog, frantically telling them someone else was inside the house now. I think they were annoyed. They thought I was just being a worrier like normal. Still, they did get up and I think try to placate me by looking around the house. They went to check all the rooms, including the basement, while I was simply scared and exasperated. They were sleepily roaming around into dark rooms completely unarmed, when God knows who had made it inside already. To my surprise, they didn't find anything though. They verbally patted me on the head and said goodnight, and I felt really foolish. That is, until the very next morning. I don't know what prompted my parents to call the police, but they did. They showed up very quickly and asked me how I'd known someone was out there. Wait, hold up, what? I started answering. Well, the cat was meowing a lot on the windowsill, you see, and my voice trailed off, waiting for the mocking reaction I'd usually get. Which I did get somewhat. The cop smirked. A cat, huh? Alright, well, get on with it then. He went on to say that someone cut the cable wires on the side of the house. They thought that whoever that person was had thought they were disarming the alarm or something. When they saw me sitting there watching TV, maybe they decided to leave. And the side door, the muddy ground gave us the ability to see the fresh tracks leading right up to it. It didn't look like it had been fooled with, but I know what I heard. However, they were able to get in. I knew it, I said to my parents. That triumphant feeling was short-lived though, when I started to mull over what I'd just seen was true. I did know someone was out there, but I didn't really do anything. And if that person had enough ill intention, they could have easily done something bad to me and then my parents. From then on, I would always check that side door and make sure it was firmly secure, and I'd always listen to the cues from my cat as well, just to be safe. So, the story. I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, a semi-small city with a very low crime rate. At least, it was back in the day when I was 14 years old. It was such a nice, quiet city that almost nobody locked their doors. I'm sure you're familiar with the type of place. People would say hi to each other on the street, and you could pretty much go to anyone's house for dinner. Your parents wouldn't be too nervous about you staying out at night or anything like that. You could walk home by yourself from your middle school basketball game or whatever without any fear, which is what I was doing this particular night. It had been a very long game and got on much later than usual. My parents had to both work in the morning, so they hadn't gone with me. That was fine though, since they went to all my other games. Couldn't be helped if they missed one every now and then. They needed to get up early tomorrow anyway. It was only an 8-minute walk from my middle school to my home, so I didn't really have any concerns about my safety. So there I am walking, right? I'm wearing a pink sweater and jeans over my basketball jersey. My hair was a sweaty mess, but I was in a really good mood. It had been a very exciting and fun game. I was walking in a very relaxed fashion, not really paying attention to my surroundings. And then I suddenly felt it. I can't explain how I knew, but I just knew in that moment I was suddenly in some sort of danger. I looked all around me, only to see parked near the blacktop fence was a Jeep idling with its lights off. I couldn't see who was inside because of this, but I knew someone was for some reason. I ducked my head and walked away from it, hoping I hadn't caught their attention. No such luck though. The Jeep began to follow me. It pulled up right next to me. I saw the window begin to open, and I fucking booked it. I didn't look back once. I just ran. I'd had such a negative feeling about that car. I didn't stop until I could see my parents' house. I thought I was safe as I arrived there. Just as I stopped in front of the door to catch my breath, I heard an engine rev behind me. That same Jeep was tearing down the street, beelining towards me. I was in a position where I couldn't run anywhere safe in time. I just stood there frozen in terror, thinking this guy was going to run me over into my own house. I backed up against the door. I must have looked every bit the victim with my sweaty hair and pale face. The Jeep simply pulled up near me. The door began to open, but some old guy across the street ran out of his house and began to yell and throw things at the car. I don't even know what the guy had said. The Jeep's door immediately slammed shut though, and it peeled away in a hurry. I didn't even get to thank the guy who had helped me, which I did feel bad about. He might have just saved me from something horrible. I simply ran into my home though. I threw myself inside and slammed the door behind me, scaring the shit out of my mom, who happened to be right there just heading to bed. When she asked me what was wrong, I told her everything, and she woke up my dad. We considered calling the police, but I didn't really have any description to give them. I hadn't seen the person inside, and I hadn't seen their license plate either. All I knew was that it was a dark Jeep and it had chased me. Not very much information to go on. After that night, my parents never let me walk home from school again. A week later, there was a story in the paper. There had been a gang rape of a young woman at a nearby parking garage, only 5 minutes away from my house. That very same Jeep seemed to be the perpetrator.